Right, welcome everybody. Really good to see a good turnout tonight. I hope there's more people come. It's a good turnout. Great to see you. This meeting has been organised by Shropshire and Telford Trades Union Council. Now, for those people who don't know about trades councils, we are basically, if you like, we're the sort of the local face of the TUC in the local community, and we're at a community level. We're against injustice, we're against racism. We campaign against the cuts and other issues, tax on jobs, conditions, along with the affiliate unions. And there's a whole range of unions that are affiliated to our branch of the Trades Council. They vary from teachers in the NUT, NAS, UCU, college lecturers, Unison, Unite, both in the private sector and the public sector, and a whole range of other people, a whole range of other workers as well. So it's quite a vibrant, lively trades council, and at the end of the meeting I'll tell you a bit about the more activities that you can come to and get involved, hopefully, with us. Right, so we're very lucky to have some really excellent speakers tonight. There will be an opportunity for everybody to have their say. I think that's very important, because that's what a meeting's about, actually, listening to each other, having a real dialogue. But what we'll do is we'll go through the speakers, and then when they finish their speaking, we'll have a time where we can actually have that discussion and talk. I would ask you to go through the chair and be mindful, because what I want you to do is I want to try and capture everybody's point of view. So I will, if you see me asking you to wind up, please comply with that, because it's not because I'm bored with what you're saying. I'm just anxious that we get everybody to have their say, because I think that's what a meeting's about, really. Thank you very much for that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce James Haddock, who's a junior doctor. Thank you, James.
Hello, I'm James Haddock. I'm a junior doctor. I work at Telford Hospital in the Trauma and Orthopaedic department. I've been working as a junior doctor for about 4 years. I only found out about this a few days ago, and I've been busy at work on call, so I do apologise if I'm rambling a bit through this. But I've just basically been asked to give everyone here an overview of the junior doctors dispute. I'm sure you'll have all heard of it. Obviously, being in the junior doctor bubble, it's just been my life for the last 8 months, and you get a slightly distorted picture of how much it impacts other people. But I'm sure you've all heard of the story. The junior doctors are negotiating a contract, and things have got rather acrimonious. I thought I'll try and be brief, but I thought I'd split it into 3 bits. So a little bit of context for the junior doctors dispute, and then what happened with the negotiations, and where we are now, and what's about to happen. I want to start by clearing up a myth. I'm sure many of you already know that a junior doctor is not a medical student. They're not in university, they're not in education. They are a professional qualified doctor, usually after 1 year of practice, qualified for independent practice, usually in a training placement under the supervision of more senior doctors, but they do provide expert care, and they are the backbone of a lot of acute hospital care. And really, after 5 to 6 years of university education, you graduate, you become a doctor, and then, depending on the specialty, it will take 5 to 10 years before you become a consultant. So junior doctor covers quite a wide range of professionals, both inexperienced and experienced. I thought I'd go back very briefly to 1948 at the beginning of the NHS. It was a radical idea, a Labour government in the post-war period, and if you believe the history books, or if any of you can quite remember, I'm not sure. It was a contentious proposal for doctors, because at the time they were set up in private practice, and they were asked basically to embark on this socialist endeavour to provide healthcare for all, without regard to ability to pay, but rather with regard to need for healthcare. And apparently, Mr. Bevan is famous for quoting that he stuffed the consultants' mouths with gold, and that's how he bought them off. And what I think he meant by that was that in addition to their NHS contracts, they would be able to continue private practice. And today, as you know, consultants do continue private practice. The story with junior doctors is a very different one. The NHS is a monopoly employer for junior doctors. We don't have any other employer to go to if we want to work in the United Kingdom. They provide our training, they provide our consultancy provision, and they give us the opportunity to become a consultant and to develop our careers. In return, a lot of service is given, and it's the tension between this service provision and training which is at the heart of our current dispute. About 20 years ago, a little bit earlier than that, in 1991, there was a new deal for junior doctors. It was recognised as the demands on the NHS were increasing, the growing population, more advanced healthcare, that junior doctors were working excessive hours, sometimes in excess of 100 hours per week. The new deal was supposed to ensure that junior doctors weren't working any longer than 72 hours a week, but they were remunerated for working very antisocial hours, and that on average they wouldn't work more than 56 hours a week. And that chimed nicely because about a decade later, the European Working Time Directive, a European Parliament piece of legislation, came into play, and it enhanced those protections even further. And the plan was that over a period from 2000 to 2009, that our average hours for everybody, but particularly for doctors, this is how it would apply for doctors because there was an exemption, that within 9 years we'd be down to, on average, 48-hour working weeks, with a maximum of 96 hours in any 1 week. So if you're on call, as I've done recently, as recently as about a month ago, I have worked 96-hour weeks, and they're not easy. And so we come to today in this new economic climate of austerity, where all public sector workers have enjoyed below inflation pay rises, or no pay rises at all, and that has meant a real terms cut in income for everybody. And by no means junior doctors are not the worst off. We haven't been complaining about our pay before the contract negotiations. There was no great clamour for pay rises, and we understood that those with the broadest shoulders should carry the load, and we were happy, I think, generally as a cohort to accept that we weren't going to get pay rises when people in just as hard jobs, nurses, firemen, policemen, and other healthcare professionals weren't getting any pay rises. And so we came to this new contract, which I don't think the professions massively clamoured for it, but the BMA thought the contract that we had was unfit for purpose. The government thought the contract we had was unfit for purpose. To talk a little bit about the contract that we have now, we have a basic salary at the moment. If we work nights, if we work weekends, which most hospital doctors in training do, there's a banding system, so you might get 20% or 40% or 50% on top of your salary to compensate you for working those hours. And as I've said, sometimes they can be quite rigorous. You can have 96-hour working weeks where you do 7 nights on call. And it was deemed to be a reasonably fair system, but as all systems are, it wasn't perfect. And there was small anomalies where someone who worked 3 weekends, one in every 3 weekends, would get the same pay as someone who worked 1 in 5 weekends. So this new contract came into being, and as I'm sure you all know, it was widely contentious. It saw junior doctors for the first time in about 40 years coming together as a body, as a trade union, and really fighting for our working rights and also to protect the NHS. I remember there was a rather large protest in Whitehall. 20,000 people were attending it. It was in the autumn. I went, and I have to say it was one of the proudest days of my life. All my colleagues were there, nurses were there, friends were there, family were there, other trade unions were there. And in this environment of austerity, it was the first time I've really felt a part of a movement against it, against what it means and what it stands for, the cutting of our NHS. the degradation of professionals within the NHS. And this is where I'm starting to ramble, I understand. So I suppose the question is, what offended us about the contract? They were going to redefine the working week, so that now Saturdays were the new Monday, and that a normal working day was Monday to Saturday. And that the allowances we got for working nights were reduced, so it was only considered part of out of hours. Instead of being after 7 PM, it'd be after 9 PM. And that meant we were going to get a pay cut, and we fought vociferously against that. While we accept that we're not expecting a pay rise, the idea of a pay cut offended us, because if you ask any junior doctor, in fact any consultant probably, I'm sure they would tell you that junior doctors are working harder now than they've ever done. The demands on the NHS are higher than they've ever been, and the number of staff is not increasing. And the negotiations have been tough, because there's been an argument between patient safety and money. The idea that we're not accepting more money. More money was never on the table. It was a neutral pay contract. That's a myth in the contract from the government and the media. And essentially, we've got to the point now where we've got a contract. I'll come to the third and final bit. We've got a contract on the table now. The government have made concessions. We've proven that a trade union and industrial action is still an effective way to engage with government to get a better deal for workers, to defend working rights, and hopefully will have inspired our nursing colleagues, who they'll be after next, and our consultant colleagues, who they'll be after next, to show them that industrial action is a way to protect yourself, that when you unify and stand together, you can protect yourself against rather pernicious government who would rather see your working conditions downtrodden. For what purpose, I don't know. Some people say they're softening it up for privatisation, but that is at the moment just conspiracy theory, I guess. I'd just like to finish in saying that now that the BMA have come to a negotiated deal on the contract, which is a lot better than the one we started with, but I'm not sure it's better than the one we have now, the next thing that will happen is the BMA will ballot its members to see whether we accept this contract. I don't know how it's going to go. We've been split again. We were unified, but we've been split. Some people think it's a good deal. Some people still think it's a bad deal because it penalises women in training. It penalises less than full-time people in training. So I guess watch this space. There's more to come, despite the media saying it's done and dusted. There will be a big vote towards the end of this month, and we'll be back in the headlines, no doubt, and there will be more contention. And that's it, really. I know I sort of haven't come to a conclusion, but if there are any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
If we can, we'll go ahead with the next speaker and then come back to the questions, if that's okay with everybody. I'm happy with that. So our next speaker is Richard Wild, who's a member of a TUC-affiliated union, which is the National Hospital Consultants and Specialists Association. Over to you.
Thank you. As Andy said, I am the National Officer for the Hospital Consultants and Specialists Association, the only TUC-affiliated union that solely represents hospital doctors. We do have some junior doctors on our books as well, but we tend to deal with specialists and consultants. As a qualified barrister, the principal amount of work that I do for the association is all about TUPE, the Transfer of Undertakings Act, which is a very simple piece of legislation which somehow gets very complex. And the reason why the majority of consultants and doctors are under this Transfer of Undertakings legislation is because as departments are closed down, or as NHS trusts merge or devolve, or as we go through privatisation and quasi-privatisation, their contracts change and their terms and conditions change. And the broad strokes of my work is overseeing the legislation to make sure that their contracts are no less favourable than what they currently enjoy. The non-elective work that a consultant has to do is going to change. At the moment, a consultant, when he or she works a weekend, is only prescribed to do emergency cover, trauma work. They don't tend to do non-emergency work. They have the right to refuse non-emergency work at the weekend. Under the current government proposals for the new contract, that right has gone completely. It's a very small paragraph in their contract. The right to refuse elective work has disappeared altogether. Consultants will now work weekends on all sorts of cases, regardless of their speciality. The crisis that puts the NHS in, nationally and locally, is that for junior doctors like James who have to report to a consultant or have to have meetings with their consultant to further their training, to further their development, to discuss their specialisation, to enhance their career, they may not ever get that chance again to meet their consultant. The consultant has to work a Saturday and a Sunday. He has to, or she has to take some days off in the week when they could be of more use in the department, when they can be of better use within the local NHS, but instead they will be at the weekend where they may never be utilised fully. And their junior doctors and their foundation doctors in training rarely get to see them. Another point that I think has occurred with the current consultant contract is that it is severely less favourable than what consultants now currently enjoy. The pension provisions are extremely different. The award system for innovation and merit is severely different. And of course the length of working time is very different in their overall working lifetime. What does that mean? That means for a junior doctor who has been to university and already built up a tremendous amount of debt, who has been to medical school and has had further enhanced debt, will then have a less favourable contract in their career and have a less favourable pension thereafter. And the RBS exoneration doesn't work. The Royal Bank of Scotland exoneration was, of course, when they were paying their bankers huge bonuses, we need the best of the city here, we have to pay for the best of the city. That doesn't seem to transpose in the NHS. Nobody seems to say we need the best of the men and women in the science of their profession to come and work in this department, therefore we need to pay for the best men and women at the science of their profession. No, we need to do it on the cheap, we need to do it quickly, and we need to do it with as much personal debt for these medical students as we feel they can rack up. And that is what I think is going to happen with a consultant contract. There will be no hope for junior doctors to become consultants in this country. Every week I look at my membership figures, I lose 2 or 3 members a week. Where have they gone? Australia, Canada, France, Jersey and Guernsey, which is a separate system. Nobody's bothered about NHS England because the viability and the rewards isn't there. If you have trained to that specification, to that specialisation, the least you can have is a favourable career. Nobody is asking to be unjustly enriched, but a rewarding contract, a generous contract, because doctors work generously. Thank you for
Okay, well the first thing I wanted to say tonight, and this is probably the most important thing I'm going to say this evening, we've got 2 A&Es and 2 hospitals because we need 2 A&Es and hospitals. So I'm here on behalf of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin Defend our NHS, and we've been absolutely clear and consistent since the campaign began 2 years ago, absolutely clear, that we're not going to get sucked into that divisive nonsense of Telford versus Shrewsbury. No, we absolutely reject that. We're not going to get pulled into that. We need both A&Es, we need both hospitals, we will fight for both. And that, as I say, is the most important thing that I think all of us in this room have got to hold on to. Beyond that, there are 2 broad themes that I want to talk about this evening. One is going to be the financial crisis in the NHS, both nationally and locally, what we've got is an NHS that's being starved of essential funding to the extent that it really is in deep, deep trouble now. And the other area that I'm going to be talking about, and people will have heard of this one, is a completely discredited project called Future Fit. And that's the utterly misguided nonsense about closing down one of the A&Es, either at the Princess Royal or at the Royal Shrewsbury, and some other damaging nonsense in there as well that I'll come on to. Now, over Easter, and people might have picked this up from the Shropshire Star or other local papers, but over Easter we effectively had a perfect storm in the NHS locally. And this applied both in Telford and Shrewsbury. There wasn't enough capacity in A&E. So you had ambulances stacked up outside with paramedics having to care for patients because there were no facilities available in A&E. People might have seen the coverage about the small child having to be taken to hospital in a fire engine because there were no ambulances available. I've spoken to a paramedic who told me there were a number of times when there were no ambulances available to respond to 999 calls anywhere in the county. If you had happened to have a cardiac arrest at that point in time, you would be in deep trouble and probably dead. This is happening now in Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin. One of the key reasons there wasn't enough A&E capacity was because we don't have enough hospital beds. If the Future Fit plans to cut hospital beds even further go through, we will have the same number of hospital beds in Shropshire that will put us on a par with Columbia. Columbia ain't got a very good health service, I can tell you that for sure. And to make things worse, and this is going back to over Easter, patients were stuck in hospital, they were unable to be discharged because the community services that they needed weren't in place to care for them. So what we were seeing a very few weeks ago was the NHS as a whole starting to grind to a halt in Telford and Wrekin and in Shropshire. What we're being told by health bosses is that Future Fit is not only a solution to that crisis, but guess what? It's going to make patient care better and better and better. And it's just possible, you know, let's think about this. It's possible that closing an A&E and reducing A&E capacity and reducing the number of hospital beds even lower than they are just now, it's just possible that that will somehow lead to better patient care. But it's not very likely, is it? It's really not very likely. It's just possible that cutting 25 million to 27 million out of spending on hospital care each and every year from 2020 onwards, it's possible that that will lead to better patient care, but again, really not very likely. And it's just possible that cutting 120 million out of NHS spending and social care, so not just hospital care, but community NHS services, mental health services, adult social care, home care for seriously ill children, and so on and so on and so on. It is just possible that those breathtakingly deep cuts will lead to better patient care. But come on, they must think we're away with the fairies if any of us actually believe that kind of nonsense. They spend a lot of money on advertising, a great deal of money on advertising, but they're telling lies, and most members of the public, fortunately, are starting to see through those lies. So what Future Fit is about, it's a cuts and closures plan. And when it started out, late 2013, early 2014, there were some good ideas in it. There were ideas about care closer to home, a network of urgent care centres spread out across the county. They were talking about community hubs, local planned care centres, lots of things that actually would have been quite nice. The A&E closure was always daft, but there were some good ideas. All of those things have now gone because there is no money left in the local NHS system to pay for them. So Future Fit now consists of closing an A&E, running down one of the hospitals, cutting hospital care overall by 30% and pushing everything that's left out into the community and vaguely hoping that GPs will pick it up with no money, no staff to pay for it. And of course GPs can't, and that's why GPs in the local medical committee are rejecting Future Fit and holding the line in doing that despite huge amounts of bullying and blackmail and arm twisting. They don't believe for 1 second that Future Fit can work. It's also the reason that even the board of Shropshire Clinical Commissioning Group, the decision-making body in Shropshire, on the 10th of May voted against progressing Future Fit, against the advice of their own chair and their own accountable officer. And that was breathtakingly unusual. It just doesn't happen in this country that boards defy their own leadership. That reflected just how desperately poor Future Fit is. What I want to do is a very quick whiz through some of the key arguments that the NHS bosses come up with, because there's an awful lot of propaganda, you know, this kind of nonsense. One of the things that they say is that it doesn't matter how far you travel to reach the A&E, because getting to specialist care is the most important thing. And they like to give the impression that that's true for everybody, no matter what's wrong with you. And that's not entirely true. And there's a very good detailed study on this from Sheffield University. For some conditions, yes, if you get the right specialist care, outcomes are better. That's true for a kind of heart attack called a STEMI, where care has been absolutely revolutionised. It's true for stroke care. It's true for major trauma. You are likely to do better if you travel a little bit further and you get specialist expert care. But for most of the patients who turn up at A&E, actually the key thing, if you've got a time critical condition, the key thing is how long it takes you to get there and how long it takes to get treatment. If you've got respiratory problems, breathing problems, you're twice as likely to die if you live 21 kilometres away from the hospital as if you live less than 10 kilometres from the hospital. This was serious academic research, large-scale research, twice as likely to die, a huge increase in risk. Overall, and this is taking patients overall, whatever conditions they've got, your chances of dying if you live that more than 21 kilometres away, your chances of dying increase by 50%. For every 2 people who die, if you live close to the hospital, 3 people will die if you live more than 21 kilometres away. Distance matters, and this is what the people who are trying to shove through A&E closure, they always skirt around. They trot out their little platitudes about, oh, the right care in the right place, and the kindest, safest care, and these lovely little sound bites, but they don't produce the evidence, because the evidence isn't there. Well, the evidence is there, and the evidence actually proves the opposite of what they're saying. There is that argument for specialist care for some conditions, but that's an argument for bypassing a local A&E to get to specialist care. It is absolutely not an argument for closing down local A&Es. They've got this wrong. They're telling porkies. They know fine well they're telling porkies, and they need to be challenged. But it does need to be emphasised, if they close an A&E, people are going to die as a direct result, and that will apply whichever A&E they close, whether it's Telford's Princess Royal or whether it's the Royal Shrewsbury, people are going to die. Absolutely. There's another thing the local health bosses say, and that's that they have to close an A&E because they can't recruit enough doctors. Until a few weeks ago, they said they had to close one of the hospitals because they couldn't recruit enough doctors. But somehow they've magically solved that problem. They haven't told us how. But you know, this is a national problem. 80% of A&Es can't get enough A&E consultants. 80% or more of acute hospitals can't recruit all the acute doctors they want. This is not a good argument for closing down 80% of A&Es, 80% of hospitals across England. One of the problems locally is you've got a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, our NHS bosses since 2009 have been jumping up and down saying, this is a terrible place to work. You don't want to come and work here. Nobody wants to come and work here. And by the way, we're going to close one of these A&Es and hospitals down anyway. and then they're surprised when they can't recruit. You know, it's nonsense. There are solutions like not picking big fights with junior doctors, proper workforce planning from the government. Commissioners do have the freedom, employers do have the freedom to pay more through recruitment and retention premium. They choose not to. They choose not to. Something they can and should do is have a collaborative arrangement with other hospitals so that our local small to medium-sized hospitals actually share expertise with other local hospitals across the region. That way you can get the critical mass for specialist services, you can give better training and support and career pathways to junior doctors. Again, they are choosing not to do it. Our local hospital bosses frankly need to join the 21st century and recognise what good practice is. And the third propaganda argument, and they pretty much dropped this one now, but the third propaganda argument is that Future Fit is evidence-based. And well, no, it isn't. Future Fit is made up nonsense. Their justification for closing down an A&E and reducing the number of hospital beds, they are pretending that by 2018-19 there will be a 32% fall in the number of hospital admissions for patients with long-term conditions or frailty. It's a made-up number. It's an invented number. They're doing the same for a whole load of other conditions, alcohol-related conditions, smoking-related conditions. Oh, those will go down by 20%. Those will go down by 20%. They are making it up. This has not been achieved anywhere in the NHS. It has not been achieved actually anywhere in the world, and there is no possibility of achieving those reductions in hospital admissions at a time when public health is being slashed, social care is being slashed, community health services are being slashed. It's an impossibility. So it's built on sand and mythology, and again, it's about lies. People ask quite a lot, which A&E are they going to close? And I'd say we're actually all losers, whichever one they close. And I've been doing some reading around this, and what the research actually shows is if you close one A&E, of course people are going to die in the immediate area where they're having to do the longer journeys. But it's more complicated than that, because people also die in the area where the A&E, the neighbouring A&E, stays open, because that A&E is going to be swamped by patients. And there are so many examples of this from around England where A&Es have closed down. There's also some solid evidence-based research around this. Whichever A&E they close down locally, all of us are going to lose out. I'm from Ludlow, right in the south of Shropshire, but if the Princess Royal A&E closes down and Telford's patients all come to Shrewsbury, that means less care for me or for my family members. If we're desperately ill, my chances of dying increase just as much as the chances of people in Telford. You do get back to which one will close, and it's very, very unclear. There's a document called a strategic outline case. You don't need to worry about what it is, but it's the next stage of Future Fit. And it's written in a way that would point very clearly to Shrewsbury A&E closing down. It says quicker and cheaper and easier to close down Shrewsbury. But it's a bit more complicated than that, because if Shrewsbury closes down, they would have to move the trauma unit to Telford, to the Princess Royal. But there's an overwhelmingly high chance that NHS England wouldn't give them permission to do that, because there's already a trauma unit in Wolverhampton. So that, because hospitals run as businesses, that would be a big loss of income for the hospital trust. And if they're sufficiently worried about that, then they'll do a U-turn, and instead of closing Shrewsbury, they'll close the Princess Royal instead. And that could very easily happen. And then there's something even more complicated than that, because the hospital trust is relying on being bailed out to the tune of £10.5 million in the current financial year by this semi-mythical fund called the Sustainability and Transformation Fund. We do not believe that they are going to get anything like £10.5 million out of this fund, because what we're starting to hear is that the money coming out of it is negligible. Well, that means that our two hospitals are at huge risk of an almost immediate, dire financial crisis, and they could simply decide Future Fit is a waste of time, we can't achieve our massive cost savings through Future Fit, we're going to take a decision to close either of our A&Es in the next 6 months, the next 9 months, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And I would not be a bit surprised to see that happen. And anybody's guess which one they would choose to close. And the only sensible response here, and this kind of takes me back to where I started, it's not to worry too much about will they close this one or will they close that one, but it's to say we need both, and of course we're going to fight for both. And I'm going to end on this, because what's happening in Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin isn't an accident. The financial crisis, the planned cuts, the planned A&E closure, these are not unique to our area. These things are happening now across England. The government is squeezing £22 billion worth of essential funding out of the NHS. Our health funding in England starting to fall further and further and further behind that of other developed countries. You know, the threat of privatisation looms ever larger. The ludicrous fights being picked with junior doctors and now with consultants. It's about destabilising the NHS and causing crisis in the NHS. And my belief is that that is absolutely planned and deliberate. I think the NHS is now on a knife edge in terms of whether or not it has a long-term future and can survive. And I'd say we have got to fight back. We've got to build a campaign locally, and we've also got to make links with other campaigns and build that fight back at national level. What we've got in Telford and Wrekin, we've got a branch of Defend Our NHS. We need to make that larger. We need to build a powerful, organised campaign in Telford and Wrekin that can start to put the fear of God into health bosses around here, and that actually can start chasing up our utterly useless MPs and get them out of the House of Commons or out of their offices or away from their dinner parties. That's how they spend their time. But get them fighting for the NHS, because at the moment, as far as I can see, they are not doing the jobs that they are elected to do, which is representing local people on the most important issue going. And, you know, what it boils down to is we need the NHS. All of us need it. We need it for ourselves, we need it for our parents, we need it for our kids. Our children's children will need it in their turn. If we don't fight for it now, it will not be there for our children, and it will certainly not be there for our grandchildren. It's too important to lose. So let's talk this evening about how we can get together, get organised, and build that fight that's going to save services.
Our council have been divisive with their own so-called campaign, which says nothing, does nothing, has no positive outcomes, and certainly doesn't talk about what this really is, which is an austerity cut, mainly because this is a joint campaign with the Tories, and of course you wouldn't get them saying that, would you? And we need to bring them along together with us, explaining the realities of what is happening here, and not confuse people, and not make people think that as long as we get the A&E in Telford, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, thanks. I very much welcome the contributions from all the speakers. I was a nurse for 20 odd years myself at Wolverhampton in cardiac critical care. And at one point we never did, but at one point we was under threat of losing the A&E in Wolverhampton, or at least there was discussion about it. And one of the consequences of that, I was given to understand, and maybe you can confirm this or not, is that if an A&E closes, then effectively it's not recognised as a teaching hospital anymore. And if it's not categorised as a teaching hospital, that has skill mix implications and willingness to go and operate there. And so the likelihood of a hospital still being a hospital after it's been removed from the teaching hospital status, is obviously, we can all see the problems with that. And so really, I think that's the position. Maybe you can confirm whether I'm right or wrong or not. The issue about the contracts and the attempted or subsequent or conspiracy theory, I think you said, prospect of privatising the NHS. I shouldn't. Some conspiracies are real.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the Great Train Robbery was real, and they conspired to do it. There's, so just because the word conspiracy is put to it, it doesn't mean it's improbable. And I think it's highly probable because one of the aspects of the Trans-Pacific Partnership is the potential prevention of being able to re-socialise services that have subsequently been privatised. And I think this government is refusing to exclude the NHS from the TTP agreement designed specifically for the purposes of entrenching a privatised health service and to prevent it being renationalised if then they have subsequently managed to do it. And so that brings me on to the border point really. The internal doctors' dispute, a sort of a standard pay dispute amongst, you know, well recognised in the trade union movement. There's, and obviously the doctors have responded to it accordingly, including the excellent and to be congratulated industrial action. That's happening in a context. It's not a vacuum, and I would, you know, encourage the BMA as a BMA to make more points about so-called statements which have got a professional air about them and these propaganda sheets that we've all had rammed down our throat, and Jill George being identified, targeted specifically as misrepresenting facts about distance, and with reading this is obviously people with agendas. But I think the BMA as a professional institution tasked with the defence of medical services in Britain has got a real duty to say what the BMA thinks of these service provisions, not what individual members of the BMA may or may not think when they're performing in a different hat and a different role. And so I you know, would look forward to that. And lastly, there's, of course, I absolutely recognise what you say in terms of the doctors weren't particularly looking for a pay rise. They just think it's pretty, you know, rum idea to have a pay cut, and of course you're absolutely right. It goes to show, of course, that it wasn't a financial driven decision by the government. This austerity is a political project. It's not an economic necessity. It's a choice being made. And that choice is in a broader context which has to be understood by all of us. And these attacks on the A&E, and Jill is absolutely right in terms of which A&E closes, is utterly and completely irrelevant. And that's where I am extremely disappointed, in as much as I could make a judgment of it, because it still seems to be a bit over there, with Telford Council's attempt to say, well, let's keep Telford open. Well, this is not acceptable, because first of all, that's not protecting Telford citizens. There's even if Telford was open and Shrewsbury doesn't, Telford citizens will be harmed by that implication, pushed into, you know, a much bigger and much more necessary turnout and response based on optimism and hope and a vision for the
Just a comment on Telford Council. We embarrassed the health bosses by the press release that Telford Council put out saying they believed the starting point should be keeping 2 A&Es. Now, I may have criticisms about the rest of their campaign and may have not said that thing too loudly. I can tell you the health bosses did not like it because they just lost one of their stakeholders. That's important for us. So, criticisms, yes, but basically that statement means that Telford Council are on our side. What I want to talk about though is, I've been reading Nye Bevan recently, his Place of Fear. Wonderful book, because it goes back to the argument about a national health service. It wasn't about commissioners and providers, it wasn't about the market. Something very relevant, I won't bring up the whole debate, but the referendum debate, the chapter in there, he talks about, because obviously the issue arose in the 1950s, should foreigners, that's the phrase he used, pay for NHS services? He said, no, it costs too much to collect it. And anyway, Our National Health Service should be a beacon for the world. That's why we shouldn't charge foreigners to use our name. And that's an idea which I think lots of people still have. It's an important idea about what the National Health Service is. It is about a service. It is about, and the dedicated people who work, when my mother worked in the NHS, from the time it started, she worked in the private hospital before because there wasn't any NHS, but she worked in the NHS the whole of her working life. And people dedicated their lives to providing the best health care that they possibly could. And that's what people remember on the streets. Yeah, I'm not particularly worried about how many people show up to a meeting. I know when I go onto the streets with a petition, we did a petitioning in Craven Arms, and everybody who came up signed a petition to keep both A&Es and the person who spoke earlier, yes, and that means keeping both hospitals, because if you lose the A&E, the hospital goes, in essence, over a fairly rapid period. That meant, everybody was willing to sign it. What the health bosses know is actually, we've got most people on our side. We need to translate that sometimes into activities, into action, to maybe some demonstrations, etc. But most people are on our side. I had Dave Evans, the chief executive, say to me, the problem is, Pete, all we're offering people is closing an A&E. We're not offering them anything else. It's not surprising you lot are winning. And I quite like that as a statement, they're being dishonest. And I think just to close it, we've got to challenge this dishonesty. Jill's been attacked for saying people are going to die. I was in a meeting last September with the medical director of SAF, Edwin Borman, when he said, if we close an A&E, it'll be worse for some patients. He didn't say die, he said it'll be worse for some patients. He refuses to say that in public. It was a private meeting. He refused to say that in public. That is being dishonest. And we have to account, we've got to call to account all of those health leaders who pretend they're doing things for the best. I'm not talking about all the doctors in the hospital, but some of those people who are more interested in protecting their own position and imposing the market are really looking at the National Health Service that we've been talking about.
Thank you very much. Pete, sorry, Julie.
I work over in Staffordshire, and I know that their A&E closed during the night. They had quite a vibrant campaign, and they lost their A&E services during the night, and a lot of their residents now have to go over to Wolverhampton, and I think, this is the thing, isn't it? It's like, you lose your A&E, you'll go to Wolverhampton, but what about all these other areas that have lost A&Es and that are also using, Wolverhampton and other hospitals? They don't tell you that. They don't tell you, who else is using other hospitals and the pressure on those hospitals as well.
I think that's a very good point in terms of the service need and the service provision already becoming overstretched, because there is, to compare to that, there is perhaps no further recruitment, or there is no extra money going into those hospitals. They're expected to make do and mend on what they can already do. And we've spoken a lot about publicity, and it will sound sometimes like a trite solution, but I do uphold it as one which was the most effective in recent times, and that is the Kidderminster Hospital solution. And that is where a very clear message was sent back to Westminster that local communities will not stand for local level disruption of their NHS when they elected their own independent MP to save their hospital. It is possible, and local communities can do it.
I've been looking, as I said earlier on, about what happens when you close an A&E. Surely A&E closed back in April using a similar excuse to what they're trying to do here, that they couldn't recruit enough doctors. That's led to Wigan having to put out a call saying, patients, please stay away, we're in crisis. It's led to enormous pressure on Preston and on Blackburn. In London, Chase Farm Hospital closes. That's led to the North Middlesex A&E being in utter crisis. In Portsmouth, Gosport A&E and Hospital closed. Portsmouth Hospital is now in an utter shambles and has just been absolutely slammed by the CQC for offering unsafe care in A&E. And the evidence is there so overwhelmingly. You close one, it leads to failure elsewhere. You know, Stoke has been clobbered by Stafford being closed overnight. The targets that A&Es are meant to hit, Stoke is doing appallingly badly. He's actually doing much worse on 4-hour targets than the Princess Royal and the Royal Shrewsbury, and yet it's sold as this wonderful centre of excellence that we can all rely on when they close down ours. Yeah, but the important point is that fights to save A&Es can win.